16 years as a janitor, Victoria stated, her voice dripping with condescension. You have no university education, no background in business management. So what makes you believe you can handle a $2 million operational budget? Diana swallowed hard. Because it's been my life. I know how to make every single penny count. I can tell you which suppliers inflate their prices and which ones provide real value. And I understand how to inspire a crew that feels overworked and unappreciated, because for 16 years, that's exactly who I was. Victoria raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. And what about this employment gap? From last April through September. My daughter required an emergency operation, Diana replied, her voice soft. I used family medical leave to be with her while she healed. I understand. Victoria jotted something down on her notepad. And your childcare situation from now on. This role demands a great deal of flexibility. We're talking about early starts, late nights, and emergency calls on weekends. Diana's fingers tightened into fists in her lap. I have everything arranged, she said, though it was a fragile truth. Missed. Washington from the apartment below pitched in whenever possible. But at 73, she wasn't always available. Before we get any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if this story is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button, because I have a truly incredible treat planned for you tomorrow. All right, let's dive back into the story. Victoria settled back into her leather chair, examining Diana as if she were a butterfly pinned to a board. Ms. Thompson, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The person in this role needs to be comfortable liaising with senior executives, various suppliers, and the property management team. We need an individual who can be a polished ambassador for Cross Enterprises. Only moments earlier, Diana Thompson had been sitting in the immaculate reception area of Cross Enterprises, clutching her neatly folded resume and references, as if her life depended on them. Beyond the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, the financial district stretched out beneath her, a jungle of glittering skyscrapers that seemed to sneer at her faded, charcoal gray uniform. The material was spotless, yet it was worn thin and pale from countless harsh, industrial cleaning cycles. A simple name tag pinned to her shirt read, Diana, Custodial Services. From the 42nd floor, the city was a different world. On the streets below, she was unseen. Just one more person in a uniform waiting for the first bus of the day. But up here, enveloped in polished marble and gleaming chrome, she felt completely bare and utterly misplaced, like she didn't belong. The sound of her daughter's voice from earlier that day rang in her ears. You're going to be amazing, Mama. I just know it. At just 9 years old, Maya had an unwavering belief in her mother, a kind of faith so pure it often left Diana staring at the ceiling late at night. What Maya couldn't possibly comprehend was that this one interview represented their final chance before a mountain of medical debt consumed them entirely. Diana shut her eyes for a second, and pieces of her morning rushed back to her. The alarm clock had blared at 5:30 a.m., just like it did every other day. Today, however, she had allowed herself one extra, precious minute under the covers. Sometime in the dead of night, Maya had slipped into bed with her. Her little frame nestled against Diana's, a small arm draped protectively over her mom's heart. The scar from Maya's surgery was now just a faint, pinkish line across her belly, a mark that would eventually disappear. The bills. However, were not disappearing. In fact, they were expanding, sprouting up relentlessly like invasive weeds. Diana had eased herself out of bed, making sure to pull the blanket up snugly around Maya's shoulders. They lived in a tiny apartment with a single bedroom, which Diana had given to Maya, choosing the fold-out sofa for herself. The early morning sun streamed through threadbare curtains that were long overdue to be replaced, casting light on the spidery cracks in the plaster overhead that her landlord swore he would repair one day. She started a pot of coffee in their old percolator, its gurgling sound a familiar comfort. As the coffee brewed, she carefully arranged her interview attire on the kitchen counter, the charcoal uniform, clean and pressed as well as possible with a finicky iron that had only one setting, scorching hot. There was also the navy blue blazer she'd borrowed from Mrs. Washington downstairs. It was a little big in the shoulders, but it looked professional. Her shoes were a pair of black flats from a second-hand shop, with a tiny scuff mark on one toe that she had carefully concealed with a black permanent marker. "Mama." Maya's small voice came from the doorway as she wiped the sleep from her eyes. She was dressed in her favorite unicorn pajamas, which were starting to get a bit short on her, but she insisted on wearing them anyway. "Morning, my sweet girl," Diana replied, pouring her own coffee while she began to prepare Maya's breakfast. It was oatmeal with a dash of cinnamon and a little bit of honey, the perfect meal for filling a small tummy without emptying your wallet. "Is your big interview today?" Maya asked, scrambling onto one of their non-matching kitchen chairs, her feet dangling high above the floor. "It sure is," Diana confirmed, placing the warm bowl of oatmeal before her daughter, next to a glass of water and her daily medicine. That medicine set them back $200 every month, and that was after the pharmacy discount was applied. "Are you feeling nervous?" Maya asked. "Just a little," Diana confessed, taking a seat across from her and watching her eat. "But I'm definitely ready. I've been rehearsing." "Can you rehearse with me?" Maya mumbled, her mouth full of oatmeal. "All right, I'll be the interviewer," Diana said, forcing a smile that masked the knot of anxiety tightening in her gut. "Go ahead, ask me something." Maya straightened her spine, her face a mask of pure professionalism. "So, tell me why you are applying for this position." "Because my #1 job is taking care of you," Diana answered with raw honesty. "I need to know you'll always have everything you could ever want. Things like your medicine, a roof over our heads that's truly ours. And yes, even those ballet lessons you've been dreaming of." Maya nodded sagely, her 9-year-old face full of judicial gravity. "That is an excellent response. You're going to nail this. Mama, I can feel it." Diana's heart swelled as she reached over their small kitchen table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You've always been my lucky charm, sweet girl, always." Once breakfast was finished, Diana helped Maya prepare for school, her fingers deftly weaving her daughter's hair into the 2 perfect braids she adored. The 3-block walk to the bus stop was filled with Maya's excited chatter, a whirlwind of stories about a science fair project and an upcoming birthday party for a classmate. The mention of a party sparked a familiar worry in Diana's mind, another expense to juggle, another gift to somehow find money for. Just then, Maya threw her arms around her mother's waist in a fierce hug. "You look so beautiful, Mama." Just like one of those important ladies from the city. A wave of emotion hit Diana, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears at bay. Thank you, my love. I'll see you right after school. Okay. Remember, Mrs. Washington will be there to get you, and she'll have a snack waiting. I know, Maya said, her bright smile faltering as a flicker of concern crossed her face. You'll make it back for dinner, won't you? I swear it, Diana promised, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I will be home. She stood on the curb, her heart aching slightly, as the yellow school bus rumbled away, Maya's small hand waving frantically from behind the glass. With a final wave, Diana turned and walked the 4 blocks to the subway, descending into the city's veins for the 45-minute journey into the heart of the financial district. The entire ride was a blur of silent rehearsal, mouthing responses to questions that might never come, trying to steel herself against the condescending glances from professionals in sharp suits who couldn't hide their curiosity about a woman in a cleaner's uniform heading downtown. Yesterday's mail had brought another stark white envelope from the hospital, a reminder of the $47,000 she still owed from Maya's emergency operation 6 months prior. The letter warned that collections would begin in 30 days, and her landlord was already dropping hints about the overdue rent. It felt like the entire burden of being a single mother was a physical weight, a crushing pressure threatening to pull her under. Today, that weight felt insurmountable. The last year had dissolved into an endless cycle of back-to-back shifts, odd jobs, and nights where sleep never came. It had all started when Maya's appendix burst unexpectedly, landing her in the ICU for 3 terrifying days while Diana prayed for her little girl to pull through. Maya had made it, but the medical bills were relentless, a constant flood that her job simply couldn't handle. $13.50 an hour was barely enough to keep them fed and housed. It was nothing against a debt the size of a mortgage. Every attempt she made to climb the ladder, to apply for any kind of supervisory role, had been met with a polite but firm rejection. They saw a 34-year-old woman with no college degree and no office experience, and they saw a dead end, not potential. Her resume screamed working class, a decade spent scrubbing floors instead of sitting in lecture halls. And they always chose the applicants with pristine academic backgrounds. This time, however, something felt possible. A management position had opened up at Cross Enterprises, overseeing custodial operations, a team of 30 people, servicing 5 different buildings. And for the first time, the job listing prioritized hands-on, real-world knowledge over a framed diploma. The salary was $68,000 a year, a figure that represented freedom, a chance to finally get out from under the debt. Diana had spent 3 weeks getting ready. She'd pored over company reports until her vision blurred, rehearsed her answers in the quiet hours after Maya was asleep, and even managed to borrow a blazer from a neighbor to wear over her uniform. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a lifeline. It had to be hers. Diana Thompson. The voice sliced through her thoughts. Diana's head snapped up to see a formidable-looking Asian woman, perhaps in her 50s, holding a tablet with an expression as cold as polished marble. I am Victoria Chen, Director of Human Resources. Please come with me. Diana rose to her feet, instinctively trying to smooth out the wrinkles in her work uniform. She trailed Victoria down a long hallway that was a shrine to corporate power, its walls covered in framed pictures of lavish parties, ceremonial ribbon cuttings, and powerful men shaking hands with elected officials. Her footsteps were completely silenced by the deep pile carpet. As they walked, every door remained shut. their frosted glass panes offering only hazy silhouettes of the people who truly had a place in this world. And this was not her world. The meeting room was a sterile cage of glass and steel, dominated by a massive table with room for 20 people. Victoria indicated a lone chair at the very end of the table, a strategic placement that put the bright glare of the windows directly behind Diana. Taking her seat at the opposite end, Victoria activated her tablet with a single, sharp tap of her finger. "Let's begin," she stated, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Describe your management experience for me." Diana centered herself with a quiet breath and began reciting the answer she had practiced 100 times. She detailed her experience leading her 6-person night crew, how she developed new efficiency standards that cut supply costs by 15%, and her role in training new staff and mediating team disputes. Throughout it all, Victoria's face remained an unreadable, impenetrable mask. The stylus glided over the tablet's screen, capturing notes Diana was not privy to. And then it came the question Diana had been bracing herself for. "It says here you've been in custodial services for 16 years, Victoria stated, her voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "No degree, no formal business education." "So, what makes you believe you can handle a $2 million operations budget?" The question made Diana's throat constrict. "Because that budget has been my life. I know how to make every single cent count. I know the vendors who pad their invoices and the ones who are worth their salt. And I know what it takes to inspire a team that feels overworked and unseen. Because for 16 years, I was one of them." A single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose on Victoria's forehead. "And this gap in your employment history?" "From last April through September. My daughter required an emergency operation," Diana explained, her voice softening. "I took family medical leave to be with her while she healed." "I understand." Victoria scribbled another invisible note. "And what about your childcare situation from now on?" "This job demands a great deal of flexibility. We're talking early starts, late nights, and weekend crises." Diana's fingers tightened into fists in her lap. "I have everything arranged," she lied, the words tasting like ash. Mrs. Washington downstairs was a godsend. But at 73, she couldn't be a permanent solution. The interviewer leaned back, her gaze analytical and cold, making Diana feel like an insect pinned to a board. "Miss Thompson, let me be perfectly candid. This role involves constant interaction with high-level executives, external suppliers, and the building's management team. We need an individual who can be a polished ambassador for Cross Enterprises." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken judgment, screaming what she wouldn't say aloud: "Someone who isn't you. Someone who doesn't carry the scent of bleach and sheer desperation." Something fractured deep within Diana's soul. It wasn't quite anger, but a weariness so profound it settled in her bones. For 16 years, she had polished the worlds of others, cleaning their messes and emptying their waste, all while being treated as if she didn't exist. She had raised her daughter single-handedly, fought her way back from a medical bankruptcy, and juggled 3 jobs just to keep them afloat. Yet, it was never enough. In a sudden movement, Diana pushed herself to her feet, the legs of her chair screeching a protest against the gleaming floor. "Thank you for the opportunity," she stated, her voice remarkably even, betraying the tremor in her hands. but it's clear this is not the right fit." Victoria's eyes widened in surprise, her composure finally cracking. "Miss Thompson, we haven't finished our conversation. I know what I'm worth." Diana cut in, her tone quiet but firm. "And it isn't in this room." She collected her creased papers, secured them under her arm, and turned towards the exit, in the reflective glass of the office walls. She saw the image of a woman in worn-out work clothes, turning her back on what should have been a chance. Yet, for the first time in ages, she felt her spine straighten. She would figure something else out. She always had to. For Maya. It was always for Maya. Diana strode down the hallway, past portraits of important faces and opaque doors that shielded the people who fit in. She jabbed the call button for the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs, while her jaw remained locked in defiance. As the elevator doors slid open, she entered, unseen, behind a one-way mirror. Sebastian Cross had been observing for the last 20 minutes, a forgotten cup of coffee growing cold in his grip. He had never intended to watch this particular interview. His schedule was packed: a conference call with Tokyo in 15 minutes, followed by a presentation review for the noon board meeting. But earlier that morning, when Victoria had dropped the candidate's file on his desk for a final sign-off, something had snagged his interest. Diana Thompson, 34 years old, 16 years as a custodian, no university education, a single mother. It wasn't any of that which made him pause. It was her address, 1247 Westbrook Apartments, Unit 3B. Sebastian's gaze had been fixed on those words for a solid minute while his coffee lost its heat. He had immediately accessed the property records on his terminal. The complex was on the south side, a part of town he knew intimately, far too intimately. It was the neighborhood his own family had called home, in what felt like another existence, long before Cross Enterprises grew into the behemoth it was now. He made a quick call to Human Resources, requesting the applicant's emergency contact details. And when the information came through, the name listed Maria Santos, grandmother. Deceased made something inside his chest clench painfully. Maria Santos. He instructed his assistant to clear his schedule and informed Victoria he would be observing the interview from the observation room. Her surprise was evident, but she didn't dare question the order. No one ever questioned Sebastian Cross. So now he was here, standing in the dim light of the viewing room, his eyes fixed on Diana Thompson as she sat. Her back was ramrod straight in the plush conference chair, her hands clutching a small stack of papers as if they were a lifeline. She resembled her grandmother, not in her facial features, but in her very essence, in the way she held herself against the world. It was that unique blend of pride and bone-deep weariness that only comes from putting in double the effort for half the credit. 37 years ago, Maria Santos had been the woman living next door to his family. It was a time when the Crosses were crammed into a 2-bedroom rental, while Sebastian's father chased a dream of starting a construction company with little more than raw ambition and a beat-up pickup truck that sputtered out constantly. Sebastian was only 7 when his father's sole client went bankrupt, leaving Joseph in the lurch. He was stuck with $30,000 in worthless invoices and no cash to pay the 3 men on his crew. The bank wouldn't give them a loan, and every potential investor had shown them the door. Even the truck was on the verge of being taken back. That's when Maria Santos, a janitor from the building where Sebastian's mom worked as a secretary, appeared on their doorstep one evening, holding an envelope. "I heard Joe's having a rough time. she told his mother, gently pushing the envelope into her hand. It's all I have saved up. It's not a fortune, but maybe it can help. $12,000, her entire life's savings, scraped together from cleaning other people's messes. $1 and one shift at a time. Sebastian's dad argued, trying to give it back, insisting it was far too much for him to ever accept. But Maria wouldn't hear of it. Pay it back when things are better, she insisted. And if you never can, well, that's what neighbors do for each other. His father repaid the full amount, plus interest, within 2 years, once the business was back on its feet. Maria, however, refused to take the extra money. Just pass the kindness on to someone else who needs it, she said. That is all I'll ever ask. On that single act of trust, Joseph Cross built an empire. That $12,000 loan was the lifeline that saved the company, which eventually became Cross Construction, then evolved into Cross Development, and finally, Cross Enterprises. The company now owned 52 properties spanning 3 cities, with an annual revenue of $2 billion. And every bit of that success could be traced back to a custodian who took a chance on a struggling dreamer with a family to feed. It was a debt Sebastian never forgot. When Maria Santos passed away 8 years ago, he covered the cost of her funeral, channeling the funds anonymously through an intermediary. He had asked his lawyer to locate her family to see if they needed anything, but the report came back stating she had no surviving relatives. Her daughter had passed on years before, and official documents showed no grandchildren. But the records were wrong, because Diana Thompson, sitting in that conference room, had Maria Santos's eyes, her posture, and that same quiet, unbreakable strength. From the observation room, Sebastian saw Victoria press Diana about the gap on her resume. He saw the look on Diana's face as she spoke of her daughter needing surgery. He saw how Victoria's expression stayed icy and dismissive as she inquired about her future childcare plans. This role demands a high degree of flexibility. Victoria's voice echoed through the speaker. We're talking early starts, late nights, and weekend emergencies. Diana's knuckles whitened as she clasped her hands. I have reliable arrangements. And Sebastian recognized the fragile lie in her voice. It was the same one his own mother used to tell when she juggled 2 jobs to help keep their family from going under. It was the universal lie of every single parent trying desperately to keep it all from falling apart. Victoria leaned back in her chair, and Sebastian knew exactly what was about to happen. He recognized that particular look. It was an expression that screamed, "You are not good enough for this world," without a single word being uttered. Miss Thompson, I'll be direct with you. This job requires interaction with high-level executives, vendors, and building managers. We need someone who can be a professional face for Cross Enterprises. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken bias. Sebastian felt his jaw clench. He reached for the intercom to put a stop to this. But Diana beat him to it. She rose to her feet with sudden grace. Thank you for your consideration, Diana stated, her voice unwavering. It's clear to me this isn't the right fit. Miss Thompson, the interview isn't over. Yes, it is. I know what I'm worth. Diana cut in. And I won't find it here. The coffee cup fell from Sebastian's grasp, landing on the plush carpet with a soft thud as its cold contents seeped into the fibers, unnoticed. She was walking out. Diana collected her papers and turned toward the exit, through the one-way glass. Sebastian watched her reflection, noting the same straight spine, the same dignified composure in the face of rejection, and the same proud refusal to plead that had defined her grandmother. Maria Santos had offered his family a lifeline when they were drowning. And now, her own granddaughter was being turned away from the very company that was built on that foundation of kindness, rejected by a manager too short-sighted to recognize the treasure she was letting slip through her fingers. Sebastian was already on his feet. He burst out of the observation room and stormed down the hall. Victoria was just stepping out of the conference room, tablet tucked under her arm with a self-satisfied smirk. "Mr. Cross, I had no idea you were watching." That candidate was entirely unsuited. "Where is she?" Sebastian cut her off. "She left, rather unprofessionally, if you ask me. She just—" Sebastian didn't stick around for the rest of her excuse. He bolted down the corridor, heading for the elevators. The numbers on the digital screen flashed as an elevator car began its journey down 38, 36, 34. He refused to let her leave. Not now. Not ever. He couldn't allow her to step out of this tower feeling like she was anything less than extraordinary. He would not let Maria Santos's granddaughter vanish into the city streets, crushed by the same weight of being unseen that her grandmother had endured. His debt to Maria was immeasurable, and by extension, his debt to Diana was just as profound. Sebastian frantically jabbed the down button over and over, but the second elevator was still lingering on the 12th floor. Spinning on his heel, he raced for the stairwell, threw his weight against the heavy fire door, and started taking the steps two at a time. The hard concrete echoed with the sound of his expensive leather shoes. The jacket of his $1,000 suit trailed behind him like a cape. 42 stories. He had to descend 42 floors and get to the lobby before Diana Thompson disappeared from his building and his life forever. His time was running out. Inside the elevator, Diana's hands trembled as she reached out and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors slid closed, encasing her in the small metallic chamber. Her own image, fractured and repeated on 3 mirrored walls, stared back at her. She saw a woman in worn-out scrubs, a woman clutching a stack of documents she had poured 3 weeks of her life into, now utterly worthless. She saw a woman who had just turned her back on $68,000 and a chance to secure her daughter's future. The car glided downward, the floor numbers changing with a cold, mechanical precision. 41, 40, 39. Diana shut her eyes, letting her head rest against the cool surface of the wall. "We require someone who can professionally represent the Cross Enterprises brand." Victoria's dismissive words bounced around inside her head. The unspoken message behind them had been painfully obvious. You lack the polish, the pedigree, the right shade of skin. You are not worthy of being acknowledged. Diana had slammed into that invisible barrier countless times before. It had been there with every job she applied for, every interview she sat through, every single effort she made to escape the circumstances life had dealt her. But something inside her had shattered today. Perhaps it was the bone-deep weariness. Perhaps it was the stack of medical bills piling up on her kitchen table. Maybe it was the image of Maya's bright, hopeful face that morning. Absolutely certain that her mom was capable of anything. Or perhaps she was simply done making herself smaller to try and squeeze into places that were never meant to hold her. 30, 29, 28. The elevator continued its smooth drop, and with every floor, Diana felt that familiar heaviness settle back upon her shoulders. The real world was waiting for her down in the lobby, a world filled with bills she had no way of paying, rent that was already late, a little girl who looked at her mother as if she could fix everything. What was she going to tell Maya when she got home? A lump formed in Diana's throat. She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her eyes, fighting back the tears. She wouldn't cry here. Not in this place. Not where the ever-present security cameras could record the moment she finally broke. 20, 19, 18. She would have to find more shifts. She could try asking her supervisor at the hospital about any overnight positions that might be open. She could scrub office floors from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., catch 3 hours of sleep, and then find another day job somewhere. It wasn't the first time she'd had to juggle 2 jobs. It wouldn't be the first time she traded sleep just to stay afloat. A soft chime announced their arrival on the 15th floor. The doors parted to admit a man in a perfectly tailored suit who gave her only a passing glance before facing forward. Diana instinctively pressed herself into the corner, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. The man took out his phone and started typing, his thumb flying across the glass screen. Diana observed him from the corner of her vision. His suit likely cost more than her rent for 3 entire months. The watch on his wrist, a sophisticated silver piece with a dark leather strap, could have wiped out Maya's medical debt completely. Even his shoes were buffed to a flawless shine. He was a natural part of this world, in this elevator, in this life. She was just a trespasser. The elevator paused once more. The 8th floor. The man strode out without a sound, and she was enveloped in silence again. 5, 4, 3. She pulled her shoulders back, her spine straightening as she adjusted the now useless papers under her arm. When she left this tower, she would do so with her dignity intact. She refused to give Victoria Chen, Cross Enterprises, or anyone else the satisfaction of witnessing her defeat. 2, 1, lobby. The doors opened to a breathtaking expanse of polished marble. The entire lobby of Cross Enterprises was engineered to make people feel small. 20-foot ceilings soared overhead. The reception desk was a monument of glass and steel, and abstract paintings that probably cost more than her lifetime earnings adorned the walls. Men and women in sharp business attire moved through the cavernous space with an air of importance, the sharp clicks of their heels echoing on the stone floor. Diana stepped from the elevator and was immediately swallowed by the crowd. No one gave her a second look. They didn't see the woman in the faded nursing uniform. She was just another member of the unseen army that kept places like this running. The janitors, the maintenance staff, the people who collected the trash and sanitized the bathrooms, ensuring the powerful and important never had to spare a thought for the logistics of their own comfort. She had been doing this kind of work since she was just 18 years old. 16 years of being a ghost. 16 years of being completely overlooked. For one fleeting, naive moment this morning, she had allowed herself to hope things could turn out differently. Diana headed for the revolving glass doors at the front of the skyscraper. Beyond them lay the plaza, and further still, the bus stop where the number 42 would shuttle her back to her own world, back to the cold truth of her life. She stepped into the spinning door, and as she emerged, the brisk afternoon air struck her like a physical blow. The December sun hung low in the sky, casting long skeletal shadows across the courtyard. A stream of people flowed past her on their way home from work, their faces lit by the glow of their phones, the rest of the world silenced by earbuds. Diana paused just outside the entrance, trying to catch her breath. when a buzz vibrated from deep within her pocket. She retrieved her phone to find a text from Mrs. Washington. Maya is home and safe. She baked some cookies, and she wants to hear all about the interview. Diana's eyes blurred as she stared at the words. How could she ever tell her 9-year-old daughter that her mother had failed them, that their final opportunity had vanished, and the medical bills would continue to mount until they had nothing left? Another vibration, a second message. She also said, to tell you, she's proud of you, regardless of what happened. She is such a good kid. Diana, you've done a wonderful job with her. A sob clawed its way up Diana's throat, and she pressed a hand over her mouth to keep it from escaping. Maya was proud of her. Sweet Maya, who was deserving of ballet lessons and birthday parties, and a mother who wasn't exhausted from working 3 separate jobs. The same Maya who had faced down emergency surgery and endured so much medical trauma, yet still held on to a fierce belief in happy endings. Diana knew she couldn't break down. Not here. Not at this moment. She squared her shoulders, slid the phone back into her pocket, and began her journey across the open plaza. The click of her heels echoed on the pavement. With each step, the portfolio of documents under her arm felt heavier. Behind her, the Cross Enterprises tower soared into the heavens, a monument of glass, steel, and untouchable wealth, its facade reflecting the passing clouds and dismissing her very presence in the same instant. She had only covered about 20 feet when a sound cut through the urban hum. A distant voice, thick with desperation. Wait, please. Wait. Diana kept her eyes forward. Shouting was the city's background music, a constant symphony of urgency that never had anything to do with her. She continued walking. Diana Thompson, please. This time she froze. That wasn't just random noise. That person knew her name, with her heart pounding against her ribs. Diana slowly turned around. A man was sprinting toward her across the plaza. His charcoal 3-piece suit jacket was flying open. His tie had been loosened, and his designer dress shoes were slapping against the hard ground. She recognized his face only from photographs. It was Sebastian Cross, the chief executive officer of Cross Enterprises, the billionaire tycoon, the very man whose face adorned the covers of business publications and the portraits in the grand lobby she had just left. He was genuinely running, a full-out sprint through the crowded courtyard, expertly weaving around pedestrians and briefcases and the evening rush of commuters. Far behind him, a security guard was standing motionless in the doorway of the building, his voice urgent as he spoke into his radio. Diana's first instinct was to bolt. Whatever was happening, it couldn't possibly be good. Corporate giants didn't chase down cleaning staff in public squares. They didn't know their names. And they certainly didn't run in $1,000 shoes. But her feet felt glued to the spot. She was rooted to the pavement, clutching her papers, as Sebastian Cross devoured the distance between them. He was in front of her in a matter of seconds, slightly breathless, his perfectly coiffed dark hair now tousled by the wind. Up close, he appeared younger than she had imagined, maybe around 40. His eyes were intense, scanning her face as if searching for something he had lost. Diana Thompson, he said again, his voice regaining its evenness. Please don't leave. Diana's lips parted, but no sound emerged. All around them, passers-by were beginning to pause and stare. A couple of people were already holding up their phones. She could already imagine the viral headlines. Billionaire CEO in dramatic public pursuit of mysterious woman. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Diana finally managed to say, "What do you want from me?" "Your grandmother." Sebastian answered, "Maria Santos. She was your grandmother." "Correct." The world seemed to shift beneath her feet. Diana hadn't heard anyone speak that name in years. Not since the funeral. Not since she had stood in a nearly vacant church, watching as they lowered the casket of the woman who had raised her into the earth. "How do you know that name?" Diana whispered. The intensity in Sebastian's expression softened into compassion. "Because 37 years ago, your grandmother saved my family, and I have spent most of my adult life searching for a way to repay that incredible kindness." The plaza, the crowd, the biting December wind, it all faded into nothingness. The only real thing left was Sebastian Cross's face and the unbelievable words that were coming out of his mouth. "That's impossible," Diana started, then trailed off. Her thoughts were a chaotic jumble, refusing to form a complete sentence. "My grandmother was a custodian. She cleaned office buildings. Her world never would have collided with yours. She knew my world before it became what it is today," Sebastian said gently, "back when my father was just getting his construction company off the ground, when our family had nothing. Your grandmother loaned us $12,000. It was her entire life savings. That single loan is the reason we survived, the reason the business survived. Everything I have, everything that Cross Enterprises is today, began with the kindness of your grandmother." Diana just shook her head, trying to process it. None of it made sense. Grandma Maria had passed away, with practically nothing, just a small apartment filled with worn furniture and a bank account that barely stretched to cover her funeral. If she'd ever had access to that kind of money, if someone owed her a debt that massive, why had she lived and died in poverty? "I never knew," Diana said, her voice sounding hollow and far away, as if it belonged to someone else. "She wouldn't have told you," Sebastian replied. "From what I remember of her, she never expected to get anything back. My father paid back the principal with interest, but she refused to take the extra. She told him to just use it to help the next person who needed a hand." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped Diana's throat. That was her. All right. Always taking care of everyone else, working herself to the bone just to make sure they were okay. Her eyes began to sting. Grandma Maria had been the one to raise her after Diana's own mother passed away. She'd pulled double shifts to make sure Diana had food on the table, clothes on her back, and a decent education. She had never once complained, never looked for praise, and never asked for the simple gratitude she was so clearly owed. And in the end, she died exhausted, worn out, and completely invisible to the world she had spent a lifetime serving. She deserved so much more. Diana whispered. "Yes, she did." Sebastian agreed, his eyes locking on hers. "And so do you." Diana's head snapped up to look at him. He was still a little winded from his run across the plaza. His usually perfect appearance, looking completely disheveled. Just behind him, more people had stopped what they were doing to stare. She could see the unmistakable glint of phone cameras pointed in their direction. "Is this why you came after me?" Diana asked. "Because you feel guilty about some old debt, I came after you. Because Victoria Chen was wrong," Sebastian said, his tone firm. "I watched that interview. I saw a woman with 16 years of real-world experience being brushed aside by someone who prizes a fancy degree over actual ability. I saw my own director of HR treat you as if you weren't qualified enough to scrub our toilets, when the reality is you have more qualifications than half the managers in this building. He took another step toward her. But yes, he went on, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate level. It's also because I owe your grandmother a debt that I can never hope to repay. Because she saw the potential in my family when not a single other person did. She believed in us when we had absolutely nothing to our name. And to let her granddaughter walk away from here thinking, for 1 second, that she isn't good enough would be the ultimate betrayal of her memory and everything she stood for. The papers in Diana's hands were trembling. I walked out of there on my own. I told Victoria Chen that I know my own worth, and it wasn't going to be found in that room. You were right to, Sebastian said. Your worth was never in that interview room. It's not a number that Victoria Chen can just punch into her tablet. Your worth is in 16 years of showing up and doing the work, in raising your daughter all by yourself, and in finding the courage to walk away when you're treated with anything less than the respect you deserve. He held his hand out to her. Come back inside with me. Not as a job applicant, as someone I need to speak with about your grandmother, about that disaster of an interview, and about what this company is supposed to represent. Diana stared at his outstretched hand, then at the powerful man who had just run through his own lobby to stop her, and then at the growing crowd watching this unbelievable scene unfold. Her thoughts flashed to Maya, waiting at home for her, ready with cookies and so much pride in her mother, regardless of what happened. Then she thought of Grandma Maria, who gave all she had to help others and never once asked for anything in return. She thought of the 16 years she had spent feeling invisible, and of that one single moment in the conference room when she had finally found the strength to demand to be seen. Diana squared her shoulders one last time. Then she reached out and took Sebastian Cross's hand. Okay, she said. Let's have a talk. They turned and walked back into the lobby in a shared silence. Diana could feel every single pair of eyes in the vast room fixed on them. The receptionist's jaw was practically on the floor. A security guard was speaking urgently into his radio. A group of executives huddled by the elevators were whispering furiously behind their hands. Sebastian Cross strode beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back, a gesture that was more guiding than forcing. His very presence seemed to create a protective bubble around them. People instinctively moved out of their path. Conversations fizzled out. The entire bustling rhythm of the lobby had ground to a complete stop. Diana's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was surreal. This was utterly impossible. CEOs didn't chase after job candidates through public plazas. They didn't appear downstairs, breathless and with their hair a mess. They didn't look at custodians as if they were people who actually mattered. But Sebastian Cross had just done every single one of those things. This way, Sebastian said softly, steering her past the main bank of elevators and toward a private corridor she hadn't noticed on her way in. A guard stood at attention, gave Sebastian a sharp nod, and then pressed a hidden button that made an unmarked door slide silently open. The elevator car on the other side was nothing like the one Diana had ridden up in before. The elevator wasn't a cage of chrome and mirrors, but a warm, intimate space, lined with dark wood and illuminated by soft, indirect light. Sebastian hit the button for the penthouse floor. Where are we going? Diana's voice was a small, quiet thing in the hushed ascent. Somewhere we can speak without being disturbed. Sebastian replied. My office. if that's acceptable to you. Diana could only manage a nod. What other choice did she have? She had promised she would return. And despite the sheer absurdity of it all, a powerful curiosity was taking hold. No, it was far more than simple curiosity. It was a desperate need to understand how this powerful CEO could have any connection to her grandmother. How could Grandma Maria, a woman who passed with almost nothing to her name, be linked to one of the most influential families in the entire city? The car rose in a smooth, silent glide. Diana's eyes followed the glowing numbers as they climbed higher. 43, 44, 45. The doors parted to reveal a space that was the complete opposite of the cold corporate conference room she had just left. This entire floor was a symphony of warm woods, rich leather seating, and massive windows that soared from the polished floor to the high ceiling, presenting a panoramic vista of the city glittering below. "This way," Sebastian said, his voice low as he led her down the hall. The door to his office was already ajar. Inside, the room was surprisingly lived in for a man of his stature. There was a large desk, but it was covered in neat stacks of paper and active files. Not a sterile, empty surface. One wall was dominated by bookshelves, packed with volumes that were clearly well read, not just placed for decoration. The other wall held a collection of photographs, family moments captured in time. Diana stopped dead in her tracks. In one of the most prominent frames, she saw her grandmother, looking younger than Diana had ever known her, perhaps in her early 30s, smiling warmly from a simple kitchen. Next to her was a man in work clothes, his arm wrapped around a woman who was holding a baby, and standing just behind them, a little boy of about 7 or 8 years old was beaming at the camera. "That's my father," Sebastian murmured, stepping up beside her. He indicated the man in the photo. "Joseph Cross. That's my mother, Helen. The infant is my sister, Caroline. And that's me." He tapped the glass over the image of the young boy. His finger then shifted to the smiling woman at the very heart of the photograph. "And that's your grandmother, Maria Santos. She lived just 3 doors down from our family in the Westbrook apartments, the very same building you live in today, just a different unit." Diana felt her throat tighten, the air suddenly gone from her lungs. She couldn't form words, couldn't make sense of it. Her grandmother, vibrant and young, standing in someone else's home, as if she belonged. "Your grandmother and my mother used to work in the same office building downtown," Sebastian went on. "Maria was part of the cleaning crew. My mother worked as a secretary. They rode the same bus every day. They became good friends when my father's business was on the brink of collapse, when we were about to lose our home. My mother confessed everything to Maria. The very next day, Maria knocked on our door, holding an envelope. Sebastian walked to his desk and slid open a drawer. With incredible care, he took out a faded, yellowed envelope and handed it to Diana. The paper was soft and worn at the edges from decades of being handled, and an elegant script graced the front. "For Joseph and Helen Cross. With faith. Go ahead. Open it," Sebastian said gently. Diana's hands trembled as she lifted the flap. Inside was a bank deposit slip. First National Bank. The date stamped was March 15th, 1987. The amount was for $12,000. Beneath it lay a note, written in the familiar handwriting Diana knew from a lifetime of birthday cards. "This is everything I have saved. It isn't much, but I hope it's a start. Pay me back when you're able. If you can't, then just help someone else someday. That is all I ask, Maria." Diana's vision swam with tears. $12,000. It was every penny her grandmother had saved, handed over to neighbors she barely knew. "My father paid her back within 2 years," Sebastian said, "with interest, but she refused the extra money. She insisted it was never about profit. It was about people helping one another." The weight of it all hit Diana, and her knees felt weak, forcing her to sink into a nearby chair. The small envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. "She never told me," Diana whispered, the sound barely audible. "She never mentioned any of this. Knowing your family, none of it. She wouldn't have," Sebastian replied. "That's just the kind of person she was. She would offer help and then completely forget she'd ever done it. She would just move on to the next person who needed her. She likely did things like this dozens, maybe even hundreds of times. Small kindnesses that completely altered the course of people's lives." He retrieved another picture from his desk. This one was more recent, clearly taken at a funeral. "When she passed away 8 years ago," Sebastian continued softly, "I took care of all the expenses, the service, the burial plot. I did it all anonymously. I didn't want any sense of obligation attached. And I had my attorneys look for any family. They told me there was no one. No children. No grandchildren. Nothing in the official records. My mother passed away when I was 3. Diana said, "Anna." Her voice sounded hollow and far away. "Grandma Maria raised me, but I was never legally adopted. I just kept my father's surname, Thompson. He was gone long before I came along, which meant that as far as the law was concerned, I wasn't technically family." A gentler look came over Sebastian's face. "I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to find you." Why Diana met his gaze. "You had no obligation to us. You settled your account with her when you covered her funeral expenses. That's more than most people would have ever done. But most people didn't have the debt to her that I did," Sebastian countered. He settled into the chair opposite Diana, leaning in with his hands clasped together. "Diana, my entire world is built on the foundation of your grandmother's belief in my family. This skyscraper, this entire corporation, the livelihoods of 3,000 employees and their loved ones. It all began with $12,000 from a janitor who saw potential in a builder with more dreams than money." His gesture encompassed the magnificent office. "I've dedicated 30 years of my life to honoring her trust, to creating an empire that would justify her faith in us. But what I saw today, I watched my own head of HR dismiss you just as the world always dismissed your grandmother, as if you were invisible, as if your contributions meant nothing, as if you were only good for your hands." A hard edge entered his tone, and in that moment, I knew I had failed. Because if Cross Enterprises is blind to the worth of a person like you, someone with your grandmother's resilience and grace, then we're no better than the very corporations that would have shut the door on my own father 40 years ago. A knot formed in Diana's throat. "You know nothing about me. You saw a single interview. I know you're a single mother," Sebastian countered. "I know you dedicated 16 years to the same thankless profession, showing up day after day to do a job most people pretend doesn't exist. I know you just walked out on a job you couldn't afford to lose, all because your dignity was challenged. That requires a level of courage and integrity this company is starving for." He rose to his feet, offering his hand once more. So, allow me to propose something. Diana Thompson, what if I were to offer you a role here, not managing the cleaning staff, but as the Director of Operations and Human Development, with a direct line to my office? Would you accept? Diana was floored. But I'm not qualified for. You have precisely the qualifications I'm looking for. Sebastian cut in smoothly. You possess real-world experience. You have on-the-ground knowledge that can't be taught. You have your grandmother's spirit. Everything else, the degrees, the certifications, those are just pieces of paper we can help you acquire. What is impossible to teach is that innate ability to see the humanity in people, the way you and Maria always have. Diana's gaze dropped to the envelope she was clutching, to the crisp deposit slip, and finally, to the familiar, looping script of her grandmother's hand. Just pay it forward someday. That's all I ask. What happens to Victoria Chen? Diana finally asked. As of 3 minutes ago. Victoria Chen is no longer an employee of this company, Sebastian stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. I radioed her termination to security on our way up. Diana's eyes shot wide. I have a zero-tolerance policy for anyone who can't recognize the worth in other people. Sebastian explained. Their resume, no matter how stellar, becomes irrelevant. This entire enterprise was founded on one principle, that everyone is worthy of a chance, that everyone deserves to be truly seen. Victoria lost sight of that. You never did. His hand was still extended between them. So, what is your answer? For a long moment, Diana could only stare at his open palm. Director of Operations and Human Development, a job that almost certainly came with a 6-figure salary, a role with a direct line to the CEO himself, an opportunity that could rewrite her entire future, and Maya's too. But could it possibly be real? Or was it just an extravagant display of guilt? A billionaire's grand gesture to clear a debt owed to a woman who was no longer here to collect. I need more information, Diana said at last. About my grandmother. About your family. I have to know exactly what this is before I say yes. Sebastian let his hand fall to his side and gave a slow nod. He moved to the vast window, his gaze sweeping over the sprawling city below. I was only 7 when our world came crashing down. He started. My father had launched cross-construction just 2 years prior. Back then, it was just him and a crew of 3, taking whatever jobs they could find across the city. Minor projects, revamping kitchens, gutting bathrooms, shoring up old porches. It was the kind of grueling work that pays the bills, but never lets you get ahead. He turned from the window to look at Diana. But my father was a true craftsman. His reputation grew. The jobs got bigger. An office overhaul. Then a small commercial building. And then came the opportunity that was supposed to be his big break. A property developer hired him to lead the crew on a complete gut renovation of a 4-story apartment complex in Brooklyn. It was a $200,000 contract, 3 times larger than anything he'd managed before. A shadow passed over Sebastian's features. He expanded his crew, invested in new equipment. He poured every last cent and ounce of energy he had into that project. And then, 6 months into the job, the developer filed for bankruptcy. Work ground to a halt. The developer vanished. And my father was suddenly stuck with $200,000 in invoices for labor and materials he'd already paid for. Diana physically recoiled. It was a story she knew all too well. Little guys getting crushed by big corporations that could simply write off their debts and walk away. Of course, the crew needed to be paid. Sebastian went on. Our suppliers were demanding payment. The bank was calling in our loans, and we were left with absolutely nothing. My dad had risked it all on that one deal, our home, his work truck, his entire name in this town. He walked back over to the desk, lifting another framed picture. This one captured the family inside a cramped little apartment. It was small and humble, a world away from the lavish lifestyle Diana now connected with the Cross family name. We were forced to move, Sebastian clarified. We sold our home to settle some of the accounts and relocated to a tiny 2-bedroom in Westbrook. My mother and father took one of the rooms. My sister and I had to share the other. My father was desperate to get back on his feet, taking any odd job he could land. But his reputation was ruined. Nobody wanted to risk hiring a contractor who had just defaulted on such a huge project. He placed the photo back down. That was when Maria came into our lives. She lived just 3 apartments away from us. Every morning, she and my mother would ride the same bus to their jobs. My mom had found work as a legal secretary. Maria was a cleaner in the very same office building at night. They started chatting during their daily commute and grew to be good friends. Sebastian's voice became softer. Maria started looking after Caroline and me after school got out. Both of my parents were working constantly, just trying to dig themselves out of that mountain of debt. Maria would be there to get us from school, take us to her place, and make sure we had a warm dinner. She never accepted a single cent. She'd just say, "This is what neighbors do for each other. This is what a community is." A lump formed in Diana's throat. That sounded exactly like the grandmother she knew, constantly helping, endlessly giving, and never once keeping a tally. One evening, my mother finally broke. Sebastian said, she told Maria everything, just how desperate the situation was, how perilously close we were to having nothing at all. She explained how my father was talking about filing for bankruptcy, about leaving town to start fresh somewhere else. My mother just wept. I'll never forget it, because it was the first time I'd ever seen her cry. He paused for a moment. The very next morning, Maria knocked on our door. My father got it. She put an envelope in his hand and turned and left before he could even peek inside. She just told him, "Faith moves mountains. Joseph, this is faith." Sebastian reached for the age-yellowed envelope on his desk again. $12,000. For a custodian. In 1987. That had to be years of her savings. Maybe even decades. She was living in a 1-bedroom flat. She took the bus because a car was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her clothes were worn until they were threadbare, and she handed my father every last thing she had. Why, Diana whispered, her voice barely audible. She hardly knew you. I've spent 30 years wrestling with that very question. Sebastian confessed. The only answer I've ever come up with is that Maria Santos truly saw people. She looked right through them, past their net worth, or their resumes, or where they stood on the social ladder. She saw into their hearts. She saw my father's desperation, my mother's terror, and 2 kids who desperately needed some kind of stability. And she decided that we were a risk worth taking. He carefully set the envelope down. My father paid back every penny inside of 18 months. He took her $12,000 and turned it back into a business. But he was much more cautious this time. He focused on smaller projects, dependable clients, and he slowly rebuilt his name. Within 2 years, he was managing a crew of 15 and had consistent work. In 5 years, he had ventured into property development. 10 years later, Cross Construction was a multi-million-dollar company. And what about my grandmother, Diana asked. She was there for it all. Sebastian replied. She'd come by for dinner on occasion. She would always bring something with her, a pie or a casserole. She never arrived with empty hands. She'd ask about the company and about Caroline and me. She'd tell my dad how proud she was of him, and she would flat out refuse every single time he tried to give her anything more than the principal of the loan. Plus, the interest she'd reluctantly agreed to. Sebastian took the seat across from Diana once more. When I was 16, my parents were killed in a car accident, he said softly. Caroline was 13. We had no one else. The court was trying to determine who would get custody of us. And Maria just appeared at the hearing and informed the judge she would raise us, if she had to. An elderly custodian, offering to take on 2 teenagers. Diana's eyes widened in disbelief. The court ended up giving us to a distant cousin over in Connecticut. Sebastian continued, someone who met the financial requirements of the state. But Maria fought for us. And just before we moved, she told me something that has stuck with me ever since. He leaned closer. She said, Sebastian, you are going to be a very wealthy man someday. Your father created something of real value, and it will continue to grow. But money is not what makes you rich. Your true wealth is measured by how you use your power to treat other people. Never forget where you started. Don't ever forget the people who helped you get where you are. And when you finally reach the top, you reach down and give someone else a hand up. A tear streamed down Diana's face. She never told me any of this. She said, she never even mentioned your family's name. I knew she had been a cleaner. I knew she had a difficult life, but I never knew. I didn't know she completely changed people's lives. She completely changed mine. Sebastian stated simply, everything I've become, this entire company. It only exists because a cleaning woman believed in a contractor who had lost it all, because she gave up everything she had to support someone she barely knew. He got up again, pacing over to the window. When she passed away, he said, his voice heavy, there was nothing I could do to save her. His voice was raw with old grief. I became everything she said I would. I amassed a fortune and incredible power, but I was helpless to stop her from dying alone, still working at 76 because her pension was an insult. He turned his intense gaze back to Diana. But I can do something for her granddaughter. I can give you the life she was denied. A real opportunity, the recognition you deserve, and the authority to use the knowledge from your 16 years of unseen labor to fundamentally change our corporate culture, to ensure that no one is ever cast aside the way Victoria Chen just cast you aside. Diana's eyes flickered between the envelope, her grandmother's familiar script, and the faded photographs of a family Maria had cherished. This is not a handout, Sebastian insisted. This is a strategic business decision. I need an advocate who truly understands the employees no one in this tower ever notices. Someone who knows the reality of their struggle, who possesses your grandmother's compassion and your own resilience. That person is you. For the last time, he offered his hand. So, I am asking you again. Will you help me honor the legacy your grandmother's faith in me helped create? Her thoughts swirled Maya, waiting at home. The crushing weight of medical bills. 16 years of being a ghost. And then, her grandmother's words. Scribbled on a worn envelope. Cut through the noise. Just help someone else someday. Diana rose to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, but her spine was like steel. She met Sebastian Cross's grasp. "Yes," she said, her voice clear. "I will." His grip was firm, but Diana could feel the faintest tremor in his palm. Too, this was more than just business for him. It was deeply personal. This was about settling a debt 37 years in the making, to the woman who had altered the entire course of his life. "There is one thing we must do first," Sebastian said, releasing her hand. "Before this position is official, before any contracts are signed, there is something you need to witness." Diana gave a slight nod, not yet ready to trust her voice. Sebastian moved to his desk and pressed a key on his intercom. "Maria, please have Richard Chen come to my office and arrange for security to escort Victoria Chen to the 45th floor conference room. Inform her it's a matter of extreme urgency. I'll join her there in 5 minutes." He ended the call and met Diana's gaze. "Richard Chen is my chief operating officer. Despite the last name, he is no relation to Victoria. He's been my right hand for 15 years. It's essential he meet you now." A knot of anxiety tightened in Diana's stomach. She was still in her faded scrubs. The borrowed blazer creased from where she'd been clutching it. She was unprepared for this, for meeting top executives in boardrooms where futures were decided. "Yes, right now," Sebastian affirmed, "because I want you to see exactly how Cross Enterprises is supposed to be run. I want you to understand how we are meant to value our people. And I want you to see firsthand the consequence for those who forget that principle." They walked back down the silent corridor to the elevator. This time, as the car descended to the 45th floor, Diana's heart hammered for an entirely different reason. It wasn't the fear of failure anymore. It was something new, something that felt perilously like hope. It was the very same conference room where Victoria had dismissed her less than 2 hours before. The same sprawling glass table, the same panoramic city views, the same cold, sterile monument to corporate dominance. Victoria Chen was standing at the far end of the room, tablet tucked under her arm, her expression a mix of impatience and unwavering self-assurance. She clearly assumed this was just another high-level meeting, another stage to perform her ruthless efficiency. Her eyes swept over Diana with a barely veiled sneer before she focused on Sebastian. "Cross, I'm glad you summoned me. I was hoping for a chance to discuss the custodial management role. This morning's candidate was entirely unsuitable, but I've already shortlisted 3 other applicants with far more impressive qualifications for your consideration. That will no longer be necessary," Sebastian stated flatly as the door swung open again. A distinguished Asian man in his early 50s entered. Dressed in an impeccably tailored gray suit, he projected an air of quiet authority and kindness. Richard Chen. He acknowledged Sebastian with a nod, shot a curious glance at Diana, and then took a seat at the table. Sebastian, however, remained on his feet. "Victoria, I called you here to address an incident from this morning. An incident that demonstrates a complete breakdown of the core values upon which I built this company." Victoria's mask of confidence began to crack. "I'm afraid I don't follow." "The interview you held with Ms. Thompson," Sebastian clarified. His tone was level, yet it was laced with a steel Diana hadn't heard until now. The voice of a man who commanded billion-dollar empires, and was unaccustomed to being challenged. I watched the entire thing from the observation room. The color drained from Victoria's face. You were watching. I was, Sebastian confirmed. And what I saw was a textbook of everything Cross Enterprises is meant to stand against. You wrote off a candidate with 16 years of hands-on experience simply because she lacked a formal degree. You judged her capacity to represent this company with any sort of professionalism based entirely on your own bigotry. You made her feel less than a person, completely worthless. Mr. Cross, I was merely upholding our standards, Victoria countered, her voice growing tense. This is a leadership role, one that demands constant interaction with our top executives and partners. We have a certain reputation to maintain. And what reputation would that be? Sebastian's voice was low and dangerous. The reputation of a company that prioritizes appearances over actual talent, that assesses people by their attire instead of their integrity. A company that has forgotten its origins. He crossed the room to stand right beside Diana. Victoria, do you have any idea how this company truly began, Victoria? Hesitated for a moment. Your father started Cross Construction in 1985. He transformed it into Cross Enterprises through smart strategies and key acquisitions. Do you know where he got the funds for that initial construction company? Sebastian pressed on. Where did the startup capital come from? Victoria paused. I would assume it was a bank loan or from investors. Wrong. Sebastian declared the startup capital came from a janitor, a woman who cleaned corporate offices for $13 an hour and handed my father her entire life savings because she had faith in him, because she recognized potential where the banks and investors only saw a gamble. He nodded toward Diana. That janitor was Ms. Thompson's grandmother, a woman named Maria Santos. Everything this corporation has become, every single building in our portfolio, every employee who depends on us, it all exists because a cleaning woman had the insight to invest in a contractor everyone else had written off. Victoria's jaw dropped, but no words came out. You turned away Maria Santos's granddaughter this morning, Sebastian went on. You saw her work clothes and her lack of a college degree and instantly decided she wasn't good enough for us. You neglected to remember that this entire empire was built by individuals just like her. Richard Chen leaned in, his face etched with concern. Victoria, is this accurate? Did you actually reject a candidate based on how she was dressed? I was simply assessing her qualifications. Victoria argued, though her tone had lost its conviction. The role has very specific requirements. The role requires foresight. Sebastian corrected her sharply. The skill to spot potential in others, to grasp that life experience is more valuable than any diploma, to always remember that every human being is entitled to be treated with respect. Those are skills you have proven you do not possess. He turned to face Richard. Victoria Chen's employment with Cross Enterprises is over, effective this very moment. Have the HR department put together her severance pay in accordance with her contract. Security will escort her out of the building. The color drained from Victoria's face, then flooded back as a furious red. You're terminating me over a single interview. I'm terminating you because you embody everything my father stood against, Sebastian stated coldly. Because you failed to remember that every single person in this building, from the chief executive officer down to the cleaning crew, is worthy of our respect. And because you made someone feel utterly insignificant when she is worth more than you could ever possibly imagine. Victoria's eyes flicked from Diana to Sebastian and back. For a brief instant, a hint of comprehension showed on her face. Then it was gone, replaced by raw anger. "This is all about your own guilt," she sneered. "You're firing a highly effective executive just to ease your conscience about some cleaning lady from 40 years in the past." "No," Sebastian said evenly. "This is about our core values. The values that Maria Santos passed on to my family. The values this company was founded on. And the values you just demonstrated. You will never understand." He gestured to the security guard who had appeared in the doorway. Victoria grabbed her tablet, her features a tight mask of barely suppressed rage. She marched right past Diana without a single glance, the sharp sound of her heels echoing on the floor. The door hissed closed behind her. A thick silence descended upon the conference room. Richard Chen heaved a long sigh. Well, that was a long time coming. Sebastian turned back to him. "Richard, I want you to meet Diana Thompson. As of right now, she is our new Director of Operations and Human Development, and she will be reporting straight to me." Richard rose to his feet and offered his hand to Diana. "Miss Thompson, it is a genuine pleasure. And I have to say, I'm relieved someone finally addressed Victoria's behavior. She has been a thorn in our side for months, but she delivered results. So I chose to overlook it. That was a failing on my part." Diana took his hand, her mind still trying to catch up with everything that had just unfolded. "I'm not entirely sure I understand what my new role entails. You'll learn," Sebastian assured her. "Richard will get you up to speed. But at its core, you are here to help us completely transform how we handle hiring, retention, and employee growth. You are going to be the reason we never again write off someone's potential based on their origins. You are going to fill the role for this company that your grandmother filled for my family." He offered a slight smile. "You are going to offer chances to people who feel they are undeserving. And you are going to show everyone that lived experience is the most powerful credential there is." Diana glanced at the conference table, at the exact chair where she had been sitting 2 hours ago, feeling utterly small and out of her depth. It was the same space, enclosed by the same floor-to-ceiling glass. Yet the entire world felt different. "When would my first day be?" she inquired. "Monday," Sebastian replied. "For today, just go home to your little girl and share the wonderful news. Rest up tomorrow. On Monday, we'll start shaking things up. 3 months on." Diana gazed from the window of her new corner office on the 44th floor, observing the sun melt over the city skyline. The perspective from this height was completely transformed. The skyscrapers that once loomed like giants now appeared as stepping stones to new opportunities. The streets that had once felt like a maze now looked like open roads. From behind, the gentle click of the door was followed by the sound of small hurried footsteps against the plush carpet. "Mama." Diana pivoted just in time to scoop up Maya, who had hurled herself into her mother's arms. At 9 years old, Maya was getting a bit big for such greetings, but Diana embraced her anyway, lifting her daughter into a joyful spin before gently placing her back on her feet. "How did dance class go?" Diana asked. "It was incredible." Maya's face was radiant, dressed in pink tights and a black leotard. Her hair was swept into a bun that was already starting to unravel. "Miss Jennifer thinks I might be ready for point shoes by next year." "Can you even imagine point shoes?" "Oh, I can absolutely imagine it," Diana said, tenderly tucking a loose strand of her daughter's hair back in place. You are spectacular. And she truly was. Maya had only begun her ballet lessons 2 months prior, the very classes she'd dreamed of since she was 6. Classes that were now finally within their means. These classes were just the start of all the things Diana could now provide for her. The mountain of medical debt had been paid off entirely. $47,000. Gone in one single transaction. Their cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Westbrook was being boxed up over the weekend. They were finally moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in a much better part of town, a home where the heating actually worked, the windows sealed properly, and roaches weren't part of the welcome wagon. Diana was earning $135,000 a year, a figure that still seemed like a fantasy each time she checked her bank account. But it was more than the money. It was the career itself. In just 3 months, Diana had completely overhauled the entire recruitment process for Cross Enterprises. She introduced a lived experience pathway for applicants who lacked formal qualifications, focusing on their practical abilities and personal character over college degrees. She mandated unconscious bias training for every single hiring manager. She launched a mentorship initiative that connected senior executives with new hires from disadvantaged backgrounds. And in that time, she'd brought 15 new people into the company. 15 individuals who had been overlooked by every other corporation. 15 souls who reminded her of where she had been just 3 months ago, people with employment gaps and life stories too complex for a standard application form. People who were long overdue for a chance. "Mama, is all of this really your office?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with wonder as she took it all in. "It's enormous." "It certainly is," Diana affirmed. "Would you like to see the view?" She guided Maya toward the massive window. The city stretched out below them, a tapestry of lights beginning to shimmer as dusk settled in. From this vantage point, you could see it all: the bustling financial district, the quiet residential areas, and the parks, bridges, and rivers that wove them all together. "It's so beautiful," Maya breathed. "It is," Diana murmured in agreement. "But do you know what's even more beautiful?" "What?" "Realizing that every single person down there is important," Diana explained softly. "The stockbrokers in those towers, and the janitors who clean them, the executives in their town cars, and the bus drivers who make sure they get home. Every single one of them has worth. Everyone should have the chance to be seen." Maya gazed up at her mother. "Is that the kind of thing Grandma Maria used to say?" Diana's lips curved into a smile. She had recently started sharing stories with Maya about her great-grandmother. Tales she herself had only learned through Sebastian. Stories of a woman who transformed lives simply by having faith in people. "Yep, sweetie," Diana said. That is precisely what she would have said. The door swung open once more. Sebastian walked in with Lily at his side. The 4-year-old had become inseparable from Maya over the last few months. While Diana was working, Maya would spend her afternoons at the on-site childcare center at Cross Enterprises, a facility that Sebastian had expanded and significantly upgraded following Diana's suggestions. "Diana, could I borrow you for a moment?" Sebastian asked. "I wanted to float an idea past you before the board meeting tomorrow." "Of course." Diana then turned to the girls. "Maya, sweetie, why don't you take Lily to the conference room next door and show her your new dance routine?" With a fit of giggles, the 2 girls scurried off. Diana refocused her attention on Sebastian. Over the preceding 3 months, their dynamic had evolved into something neither of them had foreseen. It wasn't romance, but something else entirely. Something more profound. They were partners. united in a mission to build something of true value. They were two people bound by the legacy of a woman who championed second chances, and they had become dear friends. "The board is putting forward a new initiative," Sebastian began. "The Maria Santos Foundation. It would be a nonprofit aimed at offering interest-free loans to small business owners who are shut out of traditional financing. I needed to check with you first, to ensure you were comfortable with us using your great-grandmother's name." A lump formed in Diana's throat. A foundation, he had said, with $5 million in seed money. "We'll offer loans from $10,000 to $50,000, he explained. "Along with mentorship and a support system, everything your grandmother gave my father. But on a global scale." Diana drifted back to the window, the city lights below dissolving into a watery blur. "She would have loved that," Diana whispered, her voice thick. "She would be incredibly proud." "She'd be proud of you," Sebastian said softly, moving to her side. "For what you've accomplished here, for how you've reshaped this entire company." Diana simply shook her head. "I haven't reshaped anything. I'm only continuing what she taught me, to see people for who they are, to give them a chance, to believe in their potential. And that," Sebastian murmured, "is everything." They stood together in a comfortable silence, overlooking the city, muffled laughter from their daughters. Maya and Lily drifted in from the conference room next door. It was the sound of children whose lives were untouched by true hardship. Kids who were being raised with all the chances their parents had scraped and clawed to give them. Diana's mind drifted back to that morning 3 months ago, when she had first stepped into this skyscraper, wearing her faded scrubs, feeling small and insignificant in that very same conference room. She remembered walking out of these doors convinced she had failed completely. She pictured Sebastian racing across the plaza, his expression determined and breathless. And then she thought of an old faded envelope bearing her grandmother's handwriting. It was all part of a debt of kindness, being paid forward from one generation to the next. "Thank you," Diana said, her voice barely a whisper. "For what?" "For seeing me," she answered, "for running after me, for thinking I was someone worth chasing." A gentle smile played on Sebastian's lips. "I didn't chase you just because I believed in you, although I do. I chased you because your grandmother taught my family that the greatest use of power is to lift others up with it. You are not the one who needs to thank me. I am the one who owes you my gratitude." He gestured around them at the office, at the corporation, at the new legacy they were building side by side. "You gave me a way to finally honor a debt that has weighed on my family for 37 years. You created the opportunity for me to be the kind of leader Maria Santos saw in my father. You helped me remember the real reason this company was founded." Diana looked out at the sprawling city once more. The towering skyscrapers no longer felt like insurmountable mountains. They just looked like what they truly were. Structures of glass and steel, born from human ambition, built by people, for people, nothing more and nothing less. And she knew that somewhere down there, inside every office tower, apartment building, and corner store, were people just like her. People just like her grandmother. People who were worthy of being seen. Tomorrow, the work would begin again. There were more people to bring on board, more initiatives to launch, more opportunities to create. But tonight, she was going to take her daughter home to their new apartment. Tonight, she would prepare a meal in a kitchen where the appliances were brand new. She would tuck Maya into a warm bed in a room that was entirely her own. She would fall asleep in a real bed, not on a lumpy, pull-out sofa, and she would dream of a woman in a modest dress, standing in a simple kitchen, beaming at a camera, a woman who truly believed that faith could move mountains, a woman who transformed the world, $12,000 at a time. "Come on," Diana said to Sebastian. "Let's go get our girls and go home." They walked to the conference room together. Through the expansive glass walls, they could see Maya trying to teach Lily how to do a pirouette. Both of the little girls were wobbling and giggling uncontrollably. Behind them, the city stretched out, vast and filled with infinite possibilities. Diana pushed the door open. "Ready to go, my sweet girl." Maya dashed over to her, and Diana scooped her up, holding her daughter close. From 44 floors up, the world looked different. It wasn't larger or smaller, just clearer, more authentic, more tangible. And Diana Thompson, who had once felt so invisible in her frayed scrubs, now stood at the window of her corner office and saw precisely what her grandmother had always seen. She saw a world filled with people who were worth believing in, a world filled with mountains that could be moved by faith, a world where every single person deserved to be truly seen. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey, all the way to the very end. If this story found a place in your heart, then you need to see what's coming up next. It is even more moving and inspirational than you can possibly imagine. So please, don't go anywhere. Click on the video that you see on your screen right now to immerse yourself in another phenomenal story that is guaranteed to take your breath away. Believe me,